countries. So welcome everyone, and thank you for being connected to this masterclass on the potential of sand rivers for water management and water harvesting in general. My name is Giulio Castelli. I am a researcher at the University of Florence, and this masterclass is organized in the framework of the Building Forward Better initiative by FAO. So we will have a brief welcoming session with Stefania Giusti and Professor Bresci. I'm sorry, can you please move to your microphone? Thank you. And I don't want to lose any time, so I leave the floor to Stefania. And thank you again, and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Giulio. I hope everyone's mic is off, so for the sake of the rest of the lesson, thank you. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone in today's online masterclass on the potential of sand rivers for improved water harvesting and water resource development in arid areas. The lesson of this morning is organized in collaboration with the University of Florence and its Water Harvesting Lab, as part of the activities conducted in the framework of the FAO Building Forward Better initiative. In over 2 years, the program has developed a wealth of knowledge on land and water management to present FAO and global innovative projects and tools to strengthen agriculture as a means to reduce fragility and increase rural livelihoods resilience to climate change and increasing water scarcity and land degradation. All the produced training materials are available on the initiative's webpage, and I invite everyone to visit it regularly to find the latest products, including the e-learning courses on water productivity, use efficiency, and others that we have developed and keep developing. Today, we are going to address the thematic area of water harvesting to better understand its importance in arid context to improve food security. Professor Elena Bresci and Giulio Castelli from Florence University will guide us along the masterclass to introduce the global experts that we have invited. At the end of each presentation, there will be time for questions and open discussions. Your contribution will be highly welcome, so feel free to use the chat box to post your questions and comments. As always, we hope you will enjoy the lesson and we look forward to your feedback. With this, I leave the floor to Giulio and wish you all a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefania. It's my pleasure to leave the word to Professor Elena Bresci, who is Associate Professor in Agricultural Hydraulics and Watershed Protection at the University of Florence and is also coordinator of the Water Harvesting Lab.
So good morning. Thank you very much. It's really my pleasure to be part of this program with our competencies to be shared with all the participants to this masterclass. The subject is very important, and I think it will provide a very deep insight on the importance and the role of the alluvial aquifer in water resources management, especially in arid areas. So I thank you very much for being here, and I will wish you a very good morning for being much more in depth in this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bresci. So now it's my turn. I will give you just a very quick presentation about the Water Harvesting Lab and our work in Florence. It is very short. So the Water Harvesting Lab, we define ourselves as the Water for Food Security Hub at the University of Florence. The lab is born to develop research in the field of water harvesting implementation, rainwater management through GIS application, and international cooperation. In particular, we are active in the areas with arid and semi-arid climate and in fragile regions. As you can see here, we have experience in different countries, and especially since 2021, we have some projects funded by different initiatives. And our research lines are participatory approach to water harvesting, the effect of water harvesting on ecosystem services and microclimate, collection of fog, flood-based farming system, water conflicts, hydrology of wadis, so ephemeral rivers, water-related ecosystem services, and nature-based solution. If you want to keep in touch with us, these are our contacts. We have a Facebook page, Twitter account, and also YouTube channel where this conference is streamed. So this was everything on my side. I'm stopped sharing the screen. And for the first welcome session, I'm happy to leave the floor to Maher Salman, who is a senior land and water officer at the FAO Land and Water Division. Thank you, Dr. Salman, and thank you for your presence and your speech.
Thanks so much, Giulio. Thanks, colleagues. Good morning to everyone. As said, my name is Maher Salman. I'm the Senior Land and Water Officer at the Land and Water Division of FAO in Rome and the lead of Agriculture Water Management team. Also on the same division, let me welcome you on behalf of FAO to this organized session jointly with the University of Florence. As we know, water harvesting can be defined simply as the collection of precipitation through runoff for multiple productive purposes. It is both an ancient and modern technology. Ancient because it's part of the heritage and culture of many civilizations living in the arid and semi-arid areas of the world. Modern because it really represents one of the most appropriate solutions for dealing with issues related or generated by climate change. Water harvesting technologies have helped actually and will continue to help smallholder farmers in dealing with dry spells and unexpected drought events that can hamper food production and security of rural livelihoods. Over the years, FAO has developed and implemented different solutions for water harvesting for crop production at small scale to improve farmers' food security. And in the face of climate change and increasing water scarcity, we know that managing water resources in the most effective way is crucial to increase yields and reduce potential conflicts amongst users, particularly in those contexts where water can be a limiting factor. So managing these resources are essential. As with many appropriate technologies, water harvesting is a context specific, and it requires strong coordination with local communities. We emphasize this issue, stronger and stronger coordination with local communities. But it also demands a deep knowledge of the geophysical setting of the context of any intervention to be introduced in order to maximize the effect of artificial structures and the potential of natural water retention in the landscapes around it. So today's master class will offer the opportunity to visit the perspectives on a very typical landscape setting, which can potentially be harnessed actually with water harvesting to provide a safe and stable water supply for food production and in an environmentally as well as economically sustainable way. Sand rivers represent natural water storage phenomenon laying at the bottom of dry riverbeds in arid and semi-arid areas that can be easily accessed by local populations. Although quite common in arid contexts, particularly in Africa, the water resources hidden in sand rivers remain largely unexploited in the framework of national or regional scale of water development programs. The water harvesting potential of these systems is well known to local people, but a sound and effective action to invest in the improvement of these types of nature-based storage systems is needed to improve their contribution to agriculture and food security. Today this masterclass will discuss with experts the topic and the opportunities for the exploitation of sand rivers. So the contribution will illustrate the technology, the management, and the governance of sand dams water harvesting, showing the potential of these structures for harvesting and storing productive waters in arid and semi-arid context. The guests today will provide global knowledge, experiences from the field, reflections based on a lifetime experience and advanced concept, but about this, let's say, peculiar context. I believe we will all gain valuable insights on such a key topic, and we will harvest them actually for potential applications. And let me thank you all. Thanks everyone for the contribution, and I wish you a very good one today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Maher Salman. Thank you for your speech. So we start now the masterclass. I give you again a few instructions, which can be found also in the chat. I ask kindly Ruben to post again in the chat the instruction. So we have a double language. You can switch the language by the bottom bar and check the French if you want. Each presentation will last around 30 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes of question and answer. Please post your questions in the chat, even during the presentation, and we will read them at the end of the session. So it's a great pleasure to give the speech probably to the most expert and important expert on alluvial aquifer and sand rivers, who is Professor Van Der Zaag, Pieter Van Der Zaag. He is Professor of Integrated Water Resources Management at IHE Delft, the Institute of Water Education in the Netherlands. And he will give a presentation on the missed opportunity of alluvial aquifers for water harvesting and water resources development in arid areas. Thanks really a lot for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giulio.
Please mute your microphone. There is a microphone open. Cesare, can you please shut down all the microphones and reset only mine and the one of Peter?
It's an interesting presentation. Okay.
Okay, Peter, can you reopen your microphone? Thank you. Or Cesare, can you open the mic of Peter so we can start?
Thank you. Thank you, Giulio, for this opportunity. It's always a great pleasure to talk about sand rivers. So the organizers asked me to give a presentation with this title, The Missed Opportunity of Alluvial Aquifers. But I would have preferred that it would have been called The Great Opportunity of Sand Rivers for water harvesting and water resource development in arid areas. So perhaps it is a missed opportunity, but it is also a great opportunity. So the outline of my presentation consists of these parts, and it is quite a general introduction. So this is an example of a sand river that many of us know very well. And I hope you can appreciate how beautiful sand rivers are. Please also appreciate that this is an arid zone in the dry season, and yet you see a lot of green vegetation along the Sand River, the riparian vegetation, showing that there is water. And this Sand River here has a porosity of perhaps 30 to 40%, and a specific yield of 25%. So a quarter of the sand that you see is often easily filled with water. These sand rivers occur in large parts of Africa, as is indicated here by the yellow indication. We can find them in perhaps 15 to 20% of the land area of sub-Saharan Africa, where the rainfall may be between 400 and 600 millimeters per year, hosting perhaps 150 to 200 million people. Sand rivers also occur in the desert lands, but that is not where we are interested in, because that are areas which are not regularly, where the sand river is not regularly replenished each time. Sand rivers occur in areas that so far are often considered economically marginal, lost to economic development, and that will change. These semi-arid lands are characterized by low and erratic rainfall. During the rainy season, a very long dry season, typically 250 to 300 days. Rain-fed crops frequently fail, and therefore the livelihoods are largely based on pastoralism, on livestock, small and large animals. These lands are, of course, primarily water constrained, and there is need to store water to bridge the long dry season. And as has been indicated by Dr. Salman, sand rivers naturally provide such storage. They're sandy riverbeds, as I said, consisting of coarse sands that can store easily water. Sand rivers are thus an important and great opportunity for irrigated food production in arid lands. And my expertise is mainly based on my experiences in Tigray, Ethiopia, Kenya, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. So it is a bit biased. I would love also to extend my experience to, for instance, the western parts of Africa, Sahel, etc. Now let's go back to this beautiful sand river. This is an example of work by Karin Bremer. The link you can see in the link below. And these are sand rivers in Zimbabwe. Now I show this because I want you to appreciate how many there are. And let's focus on this part. And then we see this. These are sand rivers with a width of at least 50 meters wide. So all the small sand rivers are not indicated. Now I give you a next slide. And this is a slide of the vegetation that occurs in the same area. So this is the sand rivers that we have identified, the large sand rivers. And this is the vegetation that occurs in those drylands. Now, where there is vegetation, there must be water storage. Otherwise, the vegetation could not grow. And this is vegetation, the dark green cells are vegetation with a height of at least 5 meters. And you see that the vegetation follows the sand river. Like, you can see this very well, but you can also see there's many more sand rivers that are not indicated in the previous slide. So vegetation in the landscape reveals where water is naturally stored. And this is an opportunity for using this naturally stored water also for productive purposes. I must say, of course, that the natural vegetation in the landscape provides important ecosystem services that also need to be protected. Now, there is need for more food and for more water storage in Africa. First of all, we have population growth, which is growing fast. So in 2050, we have 30% more people globally. But in Africa, the population will double in the same period, from 2015 to 2050. Population growth means that we need to produce more food. And then we have also the associated another problem, namely climate change. And here I give an example of the climate effects in Southern Africa. It is known that the maximum number of consecutive dry days during the rainy season will increase, so more dry spells. The total annual precipitation will decrease. And the number of very wet days will increase. So the rainfall events will be more intense, but fewer. This means that we need more water storage capacity. Due to population growth, there's need for more food and thus more water. Due to climate change, water availability will become even more erratic, exacerbating the need for more water storage. In the arid to semi-arid lands of Africa, sand rivers provide such nature-based storage. Using sand rivers for storing water, rather than building dams, minimizes the negative impact normally associated with conventional water storage solutions. Some examples of sand rivers used for irrigation production follow. This is a photo from Tigray, northern Ethiopia, where you see a sand river. And next to it, you see all kinds of irrigated lands that use the water stored in the sand river for irrigation. And they have these large wells where you see that the groundwater level is very shallow, typically for sand river. This is an example from Zimbabwe, where again you have the sand river. You see how shallow the water is in the sand river. And next to it, on the banks of the river, farmers, smallholder farmers, have developed beautiful vegetable gardens with support from an NGO, the Bami Trust. And here is Donna Anita, who is farming her small plot along the Limpopo River in Chokwe, Mozambique, already for 5 years without any problems of water shortage. So this is the farm-led irrigation concept that we developed with partners in the A4 Labs project. You see here a sand river, and typically a scoop hole, which is often dug by people to access the water. But you can also see the well points that can be drilled by hand for very little cost, perhaps only for 50 to 80 US dollars. These are much more effective than the scoop holes that you normally see. Associated with the well point, you can put a small pump. Here is an example of solar pump. And with this pump, smallholder farmers can easily irrigate, starting perhaps with a small plot of 0.2 hectares and gradually increasing it to perhaps 1 or 2 hectares. As was indicated by Dr. Salman already, in many places in Africa, sand rivers are not yet fully used for irrigation development. But there is great potential. In the Limpopo River in Mozambique and Zimbabwe, only in the Limpopo River and only in Mozambique and Zimbabwe, there is potential of 25,000 hectares for irrigation. And we think, but we are still calculating the details, in whole sub-Saharan Africa, there is capacity for at least 500,000 hectares of irrigation development. But perhaps even 1 million hectares. But I don't dare to write it down on this slide because we still lack the empirical proof. Sand rivers can also be further developed through sand harvesting technology, which will be explained further in this masterclass by others. I want to give an example of a hypothetical example of a sand river. And this is like a bird's eye view of the sand river. And here's a photo of me in the Bubi River in Zimbabwe. And for instance, there is some water from a well point taken from the sand river for a village here, taking 10,000 cubic meters per year. There's another village on the other side of the bank of the river, taking another 10,000 cubic meters per year, and perhaps a small vegetable garden. Now, let's assume we have a sand river of, let's say, 500 meters in length and 200 meters wide. But we can also take a sand river of 100 meters wide and a kilometer long. And we can assume that, for instance, the sand river has a depth of 2.5 meters. Since the first half meter is used by evaporation, we have 2 meters of effective water storage with a specific yield of 25%. We have a storage capacity, nature-based storage capacity of 50,000 cubic meters, for which we don't have to do anything. It has been given by nature to us. So we can develop this stretch of the river by adding more community vegetable gardens or more irrigated farm plots, slowly. And at one moment it is necessary to monitor the water levels, because if there is over abstraction, then the group of farmers, the group of water users have to take action. For instance, by stopping or minimizing the irrigation. And also by getting to know how the sand river responds to our use of the water. And slowly, the irrigation development proceeds until the threshold of 50,000 cubic meters is reached, which was the capacity of the storage, the nature-based storage capacity of the river. And then an action has to be taken. Now, in this case, we can build, for instance, a sand dam, and the details of which will be explained later in the class. And the sand dam can heighten the sand in the river by, let's say, small steps. In this case, perhaps 0.5 meter or less. If it is 0.5 meter, we store a bit more. We can store a bit more water, and we can allow some more farmers to irrigate. And so we can increase further, we can enhance further the sand dam, we can heighten the sand by another 0.5 meter. So the capacity of the storage is 7,000. So there's somebody going to the airport, but let's stick to our sand river, please. Yes. So we can heighten the sand dam by 0.5 meter, we increase the storage, and we can further increase the irrigation. In such a way, a community can slowly develop a sand river to their needs, but in an informed way, where the community keeps on monitoring the water levels so that it is possible to take action in case there is not sufficient water left. So this is the last slide of my presentation. What have we learned so far? Using sand rivers and alluvial aquifers in Africa for irrigation development can bring prosperity and resilience to rural households in so-called marginal lands. It does not require the construction of large dams, nor the construction of irrigation schemes. It can be individually done by smaller farmers themselves. The costs are limited. It can perhaps be done by $500 per 0.2 hectares, and the maximum is perhaps $1,000 per 0.2 hectares. That sounds a lot, But for irrigation development, this is cheap. This is equivalent to $5,000 per hectare. Irrigation development, conventional irrigation development, can easily cost 3 times more. Why is it so cheap? Because nature has given us the storage and the canal system, because we use the Sand River as the main canal and as a dam. This also means the cheapness of the solution is that farmers can finance this themselves, provided the first investment is aided by some external factor. And therefore, it can be farmer-led. If a farmer starts with a small plot, the farmer, if he or she is successful, can gradually improve and expand her plot. And we have had quite some examples. We've seen quite some examples in our practice. And as I indicated in my previous slides, it is possible to gradually develop the Sand River for irrigation development in a stepwise approach. And this is why we have introduced this concept of adaptive investment pathways, meaning that we can develop our Sand River in the face of uncertainty by being smart in what we invest in first and what we invest in later. The only thing that it requires is government support to smallholder farmers in the form of capacity development, training, and cheap loans, meaning loans that do not require collateral of the farmer and at very low interest rates. And then the farmers can do it themselves. Thank you very much. This is some links to websites that we have developed, which contain some more information. And if you want to have more information, there's also some references here. Giulio, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much also for being perfectly in time. I already see a couple of questions. So again, I encourage everyone to post their question in the chat and we will reread them for Professor Van Der Zaag. So the first question, I think, is from Saïd El-Louz from Morocco. It's more a question than a comment. Maybe we try to address it. We need a roadmap for long-term and near-term strategy for minimizing the impact of climate change on water resources and agriculture. And maybe we can take this comment like for a first question. So, Professor Van Der Zaag, any idea on how we can build up some roadmap for the adoption of strategies in sand rivers with a specific eye on on climate change?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good.
Sorry, just one thing. If you can, please try to speak as slowly as the presentation so the interpreter,
okay.
They need to make an extra effort now because they don't have any reference. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for this important question. You know, the interesting thing is that, for instance, we have had in southern Zimbabwe, we have had 3 years, 2016, 2018, of very low rainfall. All kinds of water supplies got very scarce. This was in the same period of the day zero in Cape Town. The sand rivers that we know in southern Zimbabwe never dried up. So sand rivers have this nature-based capacity to store a lot of water. You can also see it, for instance, in the background of my presentation, my screen here. The riparian vegetation is very rich often, and they can persist even in very dry periods because of the storage capacity. And So I would say that the capacity of the sand rivers to provide resilience to climate change is much bigger than we may think. It is much bigger than the dams that we have built and the deep wells that we have drawn. So I am very hopeful, and I think we need more research on this.
Thanks a lot, Professor Van Der Zaag. We had actually a lot of questions for you. I've seen a couple of questions on sand dams, specifically from Mesenbet Sebhat and Jemima Ouachli. I will leave this question for the final session that is on sand dams. And now we have 3 questions that maybe we can try to deal together. And they are about, first question, how we can build up a monitoring and assessment process to be sure that the investment is really worth in sand rivers. And the second question, I think, is really connected and is about how we can take into account for flood risk and flooding in these systems. I'm sorry, I keep the thing short, but because I think they are very nice questions to answer together. And the third question is if we should take into account water for an ecological reserve in sand rivers. And I think these are 3 very good questions. Thank you very much to the audience.
Okay, this is a very challenging question. Thank you for that. And all are very important. Now, the first thing is about monitoring. That's an extremely good point. So therefore, in my presentation, and also in our work with African farmers, we emphasize so much that farmers themselves have to learn to measure water levels through the season and every year, so that they get to know how the system responds to droughts and to their use of the water and the use of the water by their neighbors. So it is critical that the farmers, the group of farmers using a certain part of a sand river, jointly start to doing this. And there, of course, local institutions of the government and of the local district councils need to support farmers. But this is critical, and I fully agree that this monitoring is key. And with it comes this idea of investment pathways. What can we do? And what should we do when? For instance, should we build a sand dam, or can we wait? And can we still enjoy the nature-based storage before we intervene with the river? Now, and that is related to the second question, the flooding. As I think all of us know, these sand rivers have extreme climates. For instance, I still remember I had one photo in the Bubi River in southern Zimbabwe. It is dry, it looks dry, but in 2020, so 22 years ago, there was 4 meters of water flowing through it in the floods of 2000, which also affected heavily Mozambique because this water flows to Mozambique. So if we physically intervene in the river, we have to be very careful how to do this, because nature is very strong and very extreme. So what we see is that many of the sand dams that have been constructed for instance, Kenya or in Zimbabwe or in other places, have problems when such huge floods occur. So we have to be very conservative and very cautious in changing the landscape, because the shape of the sand river has a logic which is formed by these extreme events. And we have to be very respectful for that shape. And if we want to change that shape, we have to be very careful, because, as I often say, nature may talk back after we have made an intervention, and this may have sometimes unintended consequences. But it has to do with our lack of respect and lack of knowledge of the intricacies of the landscape that has been formed under these extreme events of large floods. The third question is about, I like very much, is about the ecological flows. It's a very pertinent question, very important question. You know what we have learned so far, and hopefully we are correct, but it is quite a complex field. The most important impact of using sand rivers for irrigation development is local. It competes with the riparian vegetation. So, and as I indicated in my presentation, the riparian vegetation, meaning the vegetation that is next to the river, which is often very rich, is very important for livelihoods of people who live there in this extreme climate, for firewood, for construction materials, for all kinds of, for honey, for fruits and other stuff. So if we develop irrigation here, we start to compete with the water that normally would go to this riparian vegetation. So we should put limits to this, because the riparian vegetation is good for nature, but it's also good for people as well. And that is why we try to develop this concept of investment pathways, where local communities agree we can forego a little bit of the riparian vegetation, but we have to protect a large part because it is also important. So that is for me the most important ecological flow. Since these are ephemeral rivers, seasonal rivers, it is very difficult to maintain an ecological flow in these rivers. That would be my answer.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Professor Van Der Zaag. I will say that it's very interesting in this topic also because you have to take into account how much the river is connected, because these sand rivers sometimes they disconnect. So this is a very important element in the ecology. And they disconnect not only on the superficial part, but also on the subsurface part. It's quite interesting. Maybe more arid areas. And we have another question that I think is very interesting too, from Dimitri Kofinas, that is from Greece, if I understand correctly, the University of Thessaly. Thank you for the masterclass. Can groundwater storage have significant impact on water quality, especially in regards to exploiting it in water reuse schemes? What is your opinion of using such schemes in storing wastewater treatment effluents? So if I understand correctly, the question is about a comparison between storing water in sand rivers and wastewater reuse schemes. So which one is better? And then maybe a second part of the question is about using maybe sand dams or sand rivers for storing the effluent of wastewater treatment plants. But it's not fully clear, but I think it's also a very interesting one.
Yeah. So I cannot answer this important question. I am not a water quality person. So my knowledge on water quality management is very limited. So in the areas that I have been working in sand rivers, these are sparsely populated areas. So the issue of wastewater is not a big issue there. And of course, sand rivers have their own natural sand filter. And farmers, I see farmers, they prefer to use the water from the sand river than from the water supply they get from, for instance, from the government. But we have to be careful because we know, for instance, in the Limpopo, in the upper parts, in the Elephant River in South Africa, there are mines that have waste dumped into the river with heavy metals. But even there, the heavy metals seem to be bound to the particles and don't affect the water quality too much in the lower downstream part in Mozambique. But I have to be careful there because I'm not an expert on water quality. And I would say, let's do more research on this because these are very pertinent issues. Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I may say one thing in this sense, I think maybe later on we will have more information because there is not very much research on the quality of sand rivers, but when it comes to water harvesting structure that are built in sand rivers like sand dam, they accumulate water and they create an hotspot for water supply for populations. And that comes very interesting because on sand dams, there is quite a good amount of research about the quality of water, and it's a little bit, a delicate issue. So we have 5 more minutes. I don't know if there are any other questions, and then we make a short break of 5 minutes. I have a final question, Professor Van Der Zaag, that I think is relevant for today. So, you told us, and this is very important, that among the right amount of rainfall is between 400 and 600 millimeters. So in this interval, you can really exploit a sand river in its full potential. I was wondering if there is a space from some development also below 400 millimeters. I do know that for sure with very low rainfall amounts, you cannot deal with this issue, but is there any possibility of exploiting these rivers even in more arid regions? Because for my experience, I know that in countries like Tunisia, with system of terracing in these rivers, you can still get a reasonable amount of soil moisture. And this is like a good interaction with water harvesting.
Yeah, thank you, Giulio. That is another interesting question. So I am an irrigation engineer. So I was interested in looking at sand rivers as a source of water storage, source of water for irrigation development. Then for that, you need actually a bit of a reliable supply, meaning that every year you can count on a certain amount of water to be used. So therefore, so far we have been working in sand rivers that have at least one flow event per year, in at least 9 out of 10 years. And then the beauty of sand rivers is that once there is a flow event, it fully recharges instantaneously. If you go to more arid zones, for instance, we have been also looking at discussed this expert from Namibia, and they are working in sand rivers that may have one flow event in 10 years. And of course, there, the situation is completely different. And it is much more complicated to say in those areas, can we use this water that is being stored, which is relatively old water, for irrigation development? Because if we use it now, we cannot use it next year. So I'm very hesitant about that. But people use this water for drinking water, and that is, of course, and for livestock watering, and that is probably, because it is an order of magnitude smaller than irrigation water, that is probably a very valid use of that valuable water in very arid zones. But we have to be extremely careful developing water schemes in more drier areas. That would be my point. We have to be more careful. So I'm focusing on the areas where you have to be less careful because the water is more easily available. But definitely you can use it, but it has to be more carefully done.
And thanks a lot for this very clear explanation. And thank you to everyone that made question. Actually, we had two extra that we will answer later because they were on sentences. And then there is another comment from Mr. Saidalut that the present status of water potential in Africa suggests sharing of expertise, experience, knowledge, analytical capabilities, and optimizing mechanisms critical for food and safety assurance. And I totally agree. Actually, Professor Van Der Zaag was involved in some projects about the sharing of experience. So they are on the slides. Maybe if I'm not asking too much, Professor Van Der Zaag, can you please copy and paste the link to your project in the chat? So maybe if we have like 5 minutes break, people can have a sense of that, of this experience that you carried out.
Some of the papers, you mean?
Both the papers and the projects.
The projects. Okay, I will do the project. That's better.
Yeah. So thanks a lot. We are on perfect timing. I think we could get a 5 minutes break and we meet again at 11 Italian time. So in 5 minutes for the second webinar of the Masterclass by Dr. Annelieke Duker. And thanks a lot and see you in just 5 minutes. thank you a lot. We are back here. It's not still 11, but I think we can just start a little bit the operations. So I think, Ruben, you can maybe post again the rules for this second session in the chat. And I'm very thrilled to give the floor to Annelieke Duker. She is a lecturer and researcher in irrigation management, again at the IHE Institute for Water Education in Delft, the Netherlands. And she will give a presentation on experience of sand river exploitation and water harvesting. Thanks a lot, Annelieke, and enjoy this second part of our masterclass.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Giulio, for introducing me. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. Indeed, I will zoom into more the experiences of exploiting sand rivers with a particular focus on irrigation for agricultural uses. So what I will be talking about, yes. So what are the types of uses that we've seen in, well, our project and research projects over the past years where we've been involved in? And basically my experiences are based on similar countries, as Pieter already explained, in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Kenya, and Ethiopia. I will show some examples of diverse forms of irrigation, the technologies that are being used, and the benefits, the challenges, and the opportunities that we see. So, well, in a certain sense, the types of uses are not much different from other sources of water. So, for example, domestic use, which you can see here, an example from Kenya. Irrigated agriculture, which I will zoom into more details in a minute. Sand rivers are much used for livestock, especially as we see it's in arid regions where livestock is often a main source of livelihood. And in dry areas, well, those who have seen sand rivers will know that it's the only green part in major surroundings. So attracting a lot of livestock and also other animals. And as you can see here, it's very shallow on this picture. It's just maybe 30, 40 centimeters or even less below the surface. There's water, so it's very easy access for livestock. Well, for other businesses, of course, it's used. So brick making or fish ponds or other, well, economic activities for communities living nearby the sand rivers. And another important one is not the use of the water, but the abstraction of the sand. So that's another, economic activity that we see in many of these areas. And more recently, we're also involved in a project in Kenya where we see that this has been, a very strong economic activity, generating a lot of cash, but it comes at a cost, actually. I'll get back to that later. So another use of this unique natural resource. And finally, we see a lot of indirect benefits from the riparian vegetation. So for making brooms or certain utensils being used in households or roof thatching or all kinds of fruits or the wood, etc., to be used or to be, for small economic activities. So let's zoom into the irrigation part. So basically, I'm showing two types of irrigation here. I know there may be many other ways of categorizing irrigation, but this is one way of looking at it. So what we've seen in many sub-Saharan countries are collective irrigation schemes. So these are groups of farmers together, schemes where the governments or large international donors basically funded the the investments and the infrastructure of these schemes. And then they're often transferred to the farmers to be managed or co-managed by water user associations. We see a lot of challenges in such systems, which has to do with the maintenance, with collecting fees, generating sufficient funds to be able to maintain them and to run them, which can be summarized as collective action problems. So what often happens is that schemes are set up, then there are a lot of maintenance, operation problems, schemes deteriorate, so the infrastructure deteriorates. And then, it's waiting basically for another donor to step in and rehabilitate the system. So, I see there and expensive investments are needed again to revive such schemes. So on the other side, we see that there's more and more attention for what is called farmer-led irrigation, what Pieter already mentioned as well. So this is a type of irrigation where farmers are the ones who make the investment. So the financial, the time, the labor, they are the ones who come up with the idea, what they want to do, and they make the payment for a pump or the land, inputs, etc., whatever is needed. They're diverse types. Some are more formal, others are informal, which, it's a bit a difficult term to use, I think. But a lot of this irrigation is not seen or recognized by formal authorities often, and they're not part of the national statistics, let's say, about irrigation development. A lot of this is on an individual basis, so families or individuals who invest in irrigation, but you also have small groups, certain collective farmers working together. The arrangements are very diverse, so we see all throughout Africa there are different types of how people rent pumps, they buy pumps, how they access land, leasing land, or have their own land, or on communal land or private land. So there's a lot of different arrangements on how farmers set this up and how they benefit from it. We see it's really a significant, major contribution to food security. And it has a much higher adaptive capacity, meaning that farmers are usually much better to cope with shocks because they are the ones who have invested in it. They are the ones who know it. They have the ownership, and they are able to deal with certain challenges in a better way. So what kind of types have we seen along Sand River? So I focus on farmer-led irrigation from now on. So very small vegetable gardens is one example. So this is an example in southern Zimbabwe. You see it's a very wide sand river. This is the Shashe River. Where you see very small farms, less than 1 hectare, where mostly women grow vegetables for home consumption. Another type is where the farm is usually a bit bigger, 0.5 hectare up to 1 or 1.5 hectare, with crops that are both for subsistence and some local marketing. So that's a combination of cash crops and crops like wheat or bananas, fruits, all diverse types of crops. Still mostly based on family labor. And then, of course, there are much more commercial forms of irrigation development. Sorry for my voice, I have a bit of cold. So this example is, you see commercial farming in the sense of maybe 4 or 5 hectares of growing French beans, for example, for export markets. That's something that we've seen a lot in Kenya. But there are also much bigger farms like the ones you see here on this map. So this is the Limpopo River, which forms the border between Zimbabwe and South Africa, where you see this large pivot and sprinkler fields for example, citrus farming, which is hundreds and hundreds of hectares, all using the water from the Sand River. And obviously, they're very different connections to input and output markets and technical knowledge. So what kind of technologies do we see? What have we seen along these sand rivers? So if you look at Google Earth, it's already very interesting to go along the rivers and see what do you see of well, what kind of shapes. And like here, this is quite obvious, right? There's something happening here. This one is very interesting in shape. And this example here from Kenya on the right side, by the way, I hope you can see my cursor. On the right side, you see these square shapes in the sand rivers. So this is a very common way of abstracting water, is through scoop holes. So they're in all kinds of different dimensions. Some are very small, just dug manually. Others are bigger. For some, the people use an excavator to excavate the sand. And it comes at a cost, especially, well, it depends much on the hydrology of the area. If the water levels remain high throughout the dry season, of course, the cost may be limited. But in many cases, you need to dig deeper throughout the dry season, which, also with manual labor, it costs a lot of money. For example, this case on the bottom left, the farmer has 3 employees, 3 laborers to continue digging throughout the dry season to keep this going. And of course, you need to do this every season, right? So after every flood event, you need to reconstruct such scoop holes. So that's a big disadvantage. Another type are well points. So these are more basically pipe systems that you put inside either in the riverbed or in the field, depending on, again, on the hydrology, whether the aquifer is extending laterally into the fields. And these are examples, the 2 pictures on the right side, basically what farmers have developed themselves with PVC pipes. And of course, you can think of ways of improving this from a technical point of view. These also mostly flush out through during flood events, so that's a disadvantage. So some farmers take them out, others leave them and have to remake it in the next season. If you make them in the field, of course, there's ways of, well, then they can sustain for a much longer period of time. But in general, these are also cheap and very easy to make. Then there are wells, of course, which are in the field or on the river banks that are being used. They're also more costly and more permanent ways of abstracting water. So these are examples from Kenya. These huge wells, similar to what we've seen in Ethiopia. This is the last type I wanted to show you. These are what's called a sump. So basically, these are large concrete boxes that are put within the riverbed in the sand with a lid on top. So during the rainy season, it can be covered so that no sand will come in. And then, well, with the pipes, it can be connected to a pump to pump water from it. These are also quite costly to construct. They can last, of course, a bit longer, but still we've seen cases where these are flushed out in the rainy season. So how do people get the water out? How do farmers do this? Well, obviously can be done with watering cans or buckets. Of course, this is very labor intensive. It has a lot of limits to the scale in terms of labor and time, but it's cheap. So it's easy to do as a way to start irrigating. What's often used are, of course, pumps. So diesel, petrol, electric pumps. What we see is, well, of course, a farmer needs a certain investment to make, needs to that first, well, usually $200-300 or around that order for a new petrol pump. And what's in certain rivers where the water levels are a bit lower, we see that there may be a challenge in the sense of the dimensions of the pump. So often the pump is too big, let's say, for what a farmer would need irrigation-wise. And then you see that the water levels may drop in the scoop hole, and it takes some time to recharge again. So that can be a bit challenging. And with sand, of course, you can imagine that there can be some technical problems. The sand coming into the engine, that's a frequently seen challenge. So in recent years, we see a lot of increase in the use of solar pumps. Most of them are, well, a bit more expensive as compared to petrol pumps. However, they have no running costs, obviously. So yeah, if you do the economics, it's definitely worth the investments. But yeah, of course, you need a higher investment in the initial stage of your of purchasing the pump. So that's a bit where the challenge is. And for what we've seen, it needs low maintenance, but I think that's also something to learn more about, to do more research about how that works out in practice. So the irrigation technologies that we see, it's mostly flood irrigation, mostly with a hose pipe. So we hardly see sprinklers or drip irrigation. That's something where farmers do not invest in much. Of course, it's more expensive. It comes with more maintenance. I think if in a case where water availability is so good, so there's so much water available, there's hardly any incentive to use more water saving technologies. So that's, I think, some of the explanations why we don't see a lot of drip or sprinkler irrigation. So what are the benefits? So we see that sand rivers have an enormous storage capacity in dryland areas, where it contributes to food security, as many farmers grow a combination of subsistence and cash crops. And we see that this cash crops, it varies from very local markets to international export markets. And especially in marginal areas, we see that this form of irrigation using these sand rivers is of enormous importance for communities. And we see that irrigation is really seen as a way, well, to survive where other income sources are lacking. So for example, in Zimbabwe, you see a lot of people where the economy is tremendously bad. Many people flee or they migrate to South Africa for other job opportunities, or they are engaged in more illegal jobs. So we really see that irrigation there plays a very important role in their livelihoods. So in the case where we've also seen that farmers were irrigating in for example, using deeper groundwater, which may be like 20-30 kilometers away from the sand river, where they saw problems with drying up their wells, and then they moved to the sand river. So you can imagine if people move even their house and everything from 20-30 kilometers further up, how important such sand rivers are. So we see that such sand rivers are a buffer to absorb shocks, so climatic shocks, economic shocks in these areas. It is so contributing to economic development, and it's often within very diversified livelihoods, so where livestock or other jobs mutually support the development of these different sources of income. We also see quite some challenges. So in basically all the places where we've been to, we see that a lot of farmers fail to sustain their businesses. So of course, farming is risky in many places. So because of the market volatility, there may be pests, in some cases floods that destroy the crops or the lands. In some cases, there are conflicts between the different. It depends on what kind of arrangements they have. That's something we've seen in Kenya. And energy access that's a huge challenge if people are using petrol pumps but cannot do not have the sufficient funds to continue buying fuel, or cannot even access it because there is no fuel available. We also see that there are a lot of farmers who fail to make the investment to go for a solar pump or a petrol pump. So they are in small gardens with buckets, but fail to make a step further because they simply do not have the financial means to make that investment. And well, some of the technical challenges that I've already mentioned in these abstraction methods. And other questions that we have are like, okay, so what are the limits to the system, right? And for whom? And what are the limits in terms of water abstraction? What are the limits in terms of when do you start competing with the riparian vegetation? So all these kind of questions is something that we're still working on, and of course it's different in any situation. And then a related question is, at which scale or how would you want to address that? If at some point there's competition among users or their environmental impact, so what could be good, appropriate scales to address that? Is that with a group of farmers? Is that at a village? Is that at a river stretch or at a basin level? How do you govern such systems? And I think that's particularly interesting because many of these rivers are not very strongly embedded in government policies, because it's often a bit, okay, is it groundwater? Is it surface water? So it falls a bit between the cracks. So a final challenge that I wanted to highlight, which we've learned about more recently, is really the impact of sand harvesting. And I think personally I have a bit underestimated how destructive this can be. So here on the right picture you see a well that used to be on the riverbed. So this is in Kenya. Where really heavy sand harvesting took place. So basically the whole river was destroyed. So there was no sand left, there was no water left. Irrigation stopped because the water just wasn't available anymore. And this happened to several rivers in the region. Also, it came with quite a lot of conflict, violent conflict within communities. So it's quite a serious problem that we've seen. Fortunately, in this case, regulation of harvesting was, as we think for now, quite successful. And they managed to also restore some of these rivers. So what you see in the middle picture is a sand dam that was constructed in one of the rivers that was heavily depleted. And within short time frame, basically the sand level started rising again. So I think that's a very good thing to learn, that if these rivers are destroyed, at least these ones, that it's possible to restore them again. And in these cases, it seems we're in the process of researching this more. That these sand dams have made a very significant contribution there. Okay, so finally, I'd like to end with what are ways forward? Where do we want to work on? So, of course, farmers are very experimental by nature, so they always change, they always learn and adapt. So that's something that we also would like to continue doing with them. What was said before, the monitoring of the system's behavior is very important, and also to do that, not just as scientists, but as with and by communities, with farmers and the people who benefit from these rivers. We're also looking into how to innovative finance mechanisms to support farmer-led irrigation. As I mentioned, the farmers who don't have the means to make that initial investment, how can you support them in such a way that how do we avoid the mistakes from the collective schemes, that the donors come in and pay for the investments, but that the farmers feel that ownership and that they are able to make their own investments and sustain their business. And that much relates to, well, what we've already seen in the previous session about these adaptive investment pathways, which basically allow for dealing with uncertainty. So at which point in time do we face certain thresholds or tipping points, and what kind of options do you have for investing then? So which is different from investing in large infrastructural developments that basically block your options. So if you put in one big dam, there's hardly any room for maneuver in the future to deal with uncertainties. Okay, so thank you very much. These were the major findings I wanted to share with you. And if you have any questions, let me know. Over to you, Giulio.
Thank you, Annelieke, and thanks again for the very complete presentation, and also for staying in the time, which is very important. Yes. No, I mean, we have 3 quite intense moments, so it's nice to have some time for the question and for reflecting. We have a first question. And I remind everyone to post their question in the chat if you have any, and also for me and you, Annelieke, to go a little bit slow, because now the interpreter, they don't have any support, so we are blind to the question that will come. So we have one question from Enrico Luca, which is actually one of our PhD students at the Water Harvesting Lab. Thank you for the presentation. You showed before the River Limpopo on the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe. Are there any cases in the world of agreements for the exploitation of transboundary sandy rivers?
Yeah, very good question. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure what these agreements are about, or what exactly they include. Of course, there's the Limpopo Commission, who is a transboundary committee, but I'm not sure whether, how these agreements look like, to be honest. So, but there may be others who may know more about this. But no.
Okay, thank you very much. If please, Enrique, sorry. Do you want to say something?
No.
No, just I mean, in the frame that we wait for more questions, and I encourage the participants just to write for any question or suggestion. Let me mention a couple of things, and then I have one question for Annelieke. So the status of transboundary river basin is a little bit slow. I mean, you might know that one of the SDG target is the number of transboundary basin agreements, and we are still doing very bad on that. So it's not only a problem of Sandy River, it's a problem in general.
Yeah.
And for my question, I just take part of the second question that we have from Ruth Quinn. She will speak later on. And it's about how did the communities manage abstraction from the Sand River? Some of the crucial of the agriculture you mentioned demands a lot of water. How did they make sure the water was shared fairly? And this is connected to the question I want to do to you, Annelieke, because you know that upstream, downstream problem, they are not only transboundary. So do you have any experience where you have an imbalance?
Yeah.
So more water taken from the upstream community. And this, I think, is related to the question.
Yeah. So basically, what I've seen so far, the issue of water availability, well, let's say the rivers where there's one exception, I will come back to that, where it relates to this sand harvesting. But the rivers I've worked in, there's hardly competition over water. So we see that there is no water sharing in that sense. So people who, in some cases there are people who share pumps, a well, for example, and then they take maybe turns. If two farmers are using it, they arrange it among themselves to take turns in pumping water, but not at a larger community level. I think what is interesting to say here is, for example, in Kenya, the case where we worked, the access to land is much more competed, or contested. So people who are, because they used to be group ranches, and then the land was subdivided. So, and initially there was not much irrigation before. There was not a lot. And at some point in the past 15, 20 years, irrigation started picking up there. So then the value and the interest of the water from the river was the increasingly important. And therefore people started, there was more competition about accessing land next to the river, because then, of course, you can use it. So that's an issue where, well, if you talk about fairness or equity, I think that is a case to keep in mind. Another thing, I think what is extremely interesting is, these rivers, which is a slightly different part in Kenya again, where this sand harvesting was so destructive that there was no water left, and there you saw, well, it's something that we're yet to study further how exactly that happened. But I think the bottom line was that communities at some point started, because the sand harvesting was done mostly by outsiders, not from the communities. And then the communities started resisting that. And then it resulted in serious conflicts. And then, well, with local government interference, finally that got resolved. So I think that's another, it's a very relevant case to learn from, I think, what happened there and how communities got organized to address such challenges and to come together and resist this. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, actually, probably it's even more than needed. And we have thank you again to all the participants, because it's very nice to have this discussion moment. We have one comment that is about the regulation and governance of the African rivers. It's still a major issue, and if this will not develop, sooner or later we will get into some more severe impacts and conflicts and environmental deterioration. And I think this is a little bit, I don't know, Annelieke, maybe if you want to comment on this, and also if Professor Van Der Zaag is connected, maybe I think this can also be like a good point to take up for you, but just feel free because your webinar was ended, and then we deal with the two new questions.
I certainly think indeed that the governance is it's extremely relevant. It's also very challenging. That's one of the points that are raised. So what is the scale? Which challenge is to be addressed by whom and at what level. And because I think a lot of collective action to address challenges, like the example I gave from the sand harvesting, comes from below, right? So I don't know if to say it's the donors who have to step in. Yeah, maybe they can support, or they can support these processes. But for me, I find it very, very interesting and relevant to see how such governance and understanding the system, monitoring the system, how that can develop from bottom up, from communities themselves, and then see, okay, what can be done, and are there any other regulations or policies needed at which scales, local government scales, local governance, or national governments that can support a sustainable abstraction and use of sand rivers?
Peter, if you want to comment also on this, or we can just move on. Peter,
yeah. I don't know. It was very funny that in some countries they don't even know whether farmers need to have a water right to take water from a sand river, and they don't know whether it is groundwater or surface water, and all that stuff. So I would strongly encourage small groups of local farmers to, as also Annelieke indicated, to jointly try to manage the resource. And then if the government comes, then explain what they are doing, and then perhaps they can get a water right as a group or something. But I don't know if that is an adequate reply. Yeah, but monitoring and local monitoring is critical. If those groups of farmers can indicate to their government that we are monitoring it in a collective way, then I think that is a very strong.
Thanks a lot. Just to sum up, and I think this is very relevant to this masterclass and to the topic of the course in general. So these systems are so peculiar, and sometimes they are in marginal lands that real and strong government action is quite unlikely. So for this context, and as well for many cases of water harvesting implementation, we should favor a bottom-up governance that can be taken up from the government. So this is an example I always made. When you deal with this kind of system, ephemeral rivers, the water is not always there. So it's also difficult to understand the system because you don't see flowing water. And the local communities are the ones that know the system best. And this applies for alluvial aquifers and also for water harvesting as well. But just let me move on to the next questions, so we keep the thing alive. So we have a lot of questions, so I will take up a couple of them. So there are two that can be going together. So they are the question from Said Lutz, again, thank you very much, and Mohamed Ali Ayadi. The question are about what are the main challenges about the lack of funds to replicate good practices for the marginalized communities, and especially for the case of women farmers. And connected to that, if you have done or they are present some studies about the cost of the single technology that we presented.
Yeah, so in terms of challenges, well, we see that, as I explained, many do not have the funds, and righteously you mentioned women here, to have the funds to make that first investment in either solar or a petrol pump. So they would like to irrigate, but sometimes they irrigate with a bucket, but they cannot go beyond to grow and to expand and to benefit more from irrigation. So that's indeed something that we're really trying to develop now in projects. So other ways of loans, or what they call pay-as-you-go modalities to support farmers in investing in a pump together. So and about the costs, so it really depends on the type of technology, of course, but I think like small petrol pumps, they're usually in the range of $200, maybe $300. Solar pumps are more expensive. Well, it depends on the capacity, of course. The ones, for example, we saw in Kenya are about €600 that are especially for smallholder farmers. So, and then one of the solutions we work with and we've experimented with in the different countries is also between $500 and $1,000, and that it also includes the installation of the well point and the pipes, etc. So that's a bit the price range that we're talking about, which are significant amounts of money for smallholder farmers, of course.
Thank you very much, Annelieke. Also, this was quite complete answer. I mean, I don't know if there are other questions. There is a comment by Pieter that says, I don't know if you want to read this directly, Annelieke, and comment on it.
Yeah, so the cost of making a well point, which is of course important, because if you manage to make a well point that can sustain the seasons, then you don't need to, you avoid having the costs of every year making a scoop hole or another type of abstraction technology.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know if someone wants to say something, but I have one comment here. So, because we work on this actually in Mozambique, but these technologies are replicable in any countries. I'm sure also Niger and Mali, in the area where the rainfall allows sustainability of sand rivers. This is quite a critical point. The use of shallow wells for sand rivers provided by local communities. So I was discussing this with Pieter while we were preparing this topic, this masterclass, that we have experienced in Mozambique, where the commercial drillers, they refuse to build shallow wells, and they want just to work with UNICEF and do deep wells. And we tried this technology that is called flood wells. So these are a little bit more engineered shallow wells that can sustain the flooding. And this is very relevant. And I know that this is not really water harvesting in the strict sense, but now you will see with the last presentation about water harvesting in alluvial aquifers that you can even improve the water retention capacity of these rivers with water harvesting, and then in this context do additional water abstraction. I don't know if there are any other questions. So I have one question, if possible, for Annelieke, and then we can have another break if there are not other questions. So you talk about water supply technology, and of course we know that in this context water is quite available. I was wondering if, in your experience, you find out which are the agronomic practices that are used by the farmers to keep water in the soil. In the sense, if these farmers, they take water, but they also do mulching, and they try to have irrigation, but also to avoid evapotranspiration of the water in their fields, because still we are talking about arid areas.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I think it really varies per region. So then like mulching, yes, I've seen farmers do it, but not all. So it's definitely something that is practiced. We saw, for example, other examples were in Kenya, where they used this called, what did they use it? I think spot irrigation or something, or maybe that's the name we gave it. But where they make like small pits around the a size of maybe 20 by 20 centimeters around each plant to irrigate. I've personally not studied it in terms of how it conserves water, so I'm not sure about that. There are different the techniques that are being used, but I'm not an expert in that sense to give any evaluation of these techniques.
I can comment on this, and this is exactly. I mean, thank you, Peter. And this is another important point. The pits, you see, like I posted, pits are just the type of water harvesting technologies that you can use for improving the connection between the water supply and the water conservation in the fields. And pits, I put here a technical sheet. They are a very common water harvesting, micro catchment water harvesting that can be found in all the Sahelian region, and that's like very interesting. Maybe a next step for research. And another point that is very true by Peter that says, I don't know if Peter you want to comment on this.
Yeah. So this was the thing that was mentioned by Stephen Hussey, who was the director of an NGO in Zimbabwe, the Bana, and he mentioned that fencing was very important, and we never realized that it was really important. And now, after a few years, I know it is very important, and it is relatively expensive for poor farmers. So here again, perhaps cheap loans can help, because the good fence against the monkeys, or it is small goats or whatever that invade the garden and mess up and eat up everything is an issue, and often not properly appreciated.
Yeah, if I may close with one comment on this that is very relevant, but we have experience also the other way around. So that in some cases, and I'm talking now about the opposite side of Africa, Angola, but I think it might be the same in other countries based on pastoralism, that sand rivers sometimes are traditionally intertwined, connected with the roots of transhumance. So we also have seen the other way around, that if you fence this river, if you block the access to the sand river, which are important for the herders, you actually lock a water source that was traditionally available for centuries for these people moving the cows or whatever from the seaside to the mountains and vice versa.
No, but this is only about fencing the small irrigation plot.
Yeah. That's completely.
Not fencing the river.
Yeah.
Because then you will run into trouble. I fully agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So we were in time also for this second spot. I don't know. There is another final question. I don't know if you want to take up this and then we stop. Sorry. What type of material you should use for avoiding evapotranspiration for mulching? So which is basically the best mulching for arid areas, considering that for mulching you would use vegetation, but you don't have that much vegetation in an arid area. Yeah, okay. So I don't know if you get the question, Annelieke. Is about
I get the question, but I'm not an expert in this, so I wouldn't say which type is the best. I can't. meaningful comments.
Yeah, I'm sorry because I turned the question to you and you already mentioned this, but
No problem.
if I may, I mean, consider what Professor Van Der Zaag said in the beginning. So around alluvial aquifers, and we will see especially around sand dams, you do have vegetation. So you would have like vegetation for mulching, and that's like a good circle. Okay, you have water, you want to conserve the water, but you have also vegetation because you have water. So it's a little bit different. It's not mulching in an area with totally no vegetation. And I hope this answered the question. So thanks again, and I would make another short break, 10 minutes, and we see at 12 Italian time for the last presentation that is about water harvesting in alluvial aquifers with sand dams. Thanks a lot, and see you in 10 minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. So just 1 minute to give everyone the moments to get back in track for the third and last session of this masterclass. So I think Ruben posted again the instruction for the meeting. I'm asking just another favor to every one of you, and that is to keep your camera off apart from the presenters, because we are making a recording of the session. So if we have a few cameras on, that will be less heavy the recording and more easily shared with other people in the world. And we came to the last session for the today masterclass. So just to debrief a little bit with all of you, the order of the presentation was made to give an idea of the potential and opportunity of alluvial aquifers, to give some facts about the current water management option in this context. And now the third presentation will be about the option for water harvesting in this context, which is really, we would say, a very interesting topic for many regions in the world. And the peculiar structure that we use are sand dams. So today, we are also very happy to have two colleagues working a lot on these topics. They publish many pieces of research work, but they also have field experience on that. They will give a shared presentation. So we have Ruth Quinn, who is Assistant Lecturer of Civil, Environmental and Water Engineering at the Atlantic Technological University in Sligo, Ireland, and Jessica Eisma, who is Assistant Professor at the University of Texas in Arlington. So thanks really a lot, because she woke up very early this morning for being with us. And the floor is yours. So I don't know who is sharing the screen. Just one remark. Again, please try to speak a little bit slowly for the interpretation. We have time. We are not in a rush. Thank you very much.
So hopefully you all can see this. If you cannot, let me know.
It's okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessica Eisma, as Giulio just said, and today Dr. Ruth Quinn and I will be talking with you about engineering water storage systems, the sand dam water harvesting.
Jessica, sorry for interrupting. Can you please move full screen? It's not full screen, the presentation.
It's not? Okay.
Yeah, I think you might have a double screen on your laptop.
Yes.
So try to share the second screen, not this one, the other one.
Okay, I just shared the app, but I will change how I am sharing, and that should work better. Does that look better?
That's perfect now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'll begin again. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessica Eisma, and today Dr. Ruth Quinn and I will be talking with you about engineering water storage systems, the sand dams water harvesting. Today, we will go through the instructor background, provide a brief introduction to sand dams for those of you who are unfamiliar, design considerations for sand dams, environmental impacts of sand dams and the surrounding aquifer, measuring sand dam success, and conclusions. First, we will tell you a little bit more about our sand dam experience. My name is Jessica Eisma, as I've said 3 times now, and I am an assistant professor of water resources engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington. I've been involved with sand dam research since 2015, and I spent 1 year in Tanzania closely studying how sand dams interact with the surrounding environment. And Ruth? if you want to say a few words.
Yes, so my name is Ruth, and similar to Jessica, I've been working on sand dams since 2017 for me. And I also had the opportunity to spend 6 months in Kenya looking at water quality and water quantity in sand dams.
Thank you. Next, an overview of sand dams. So what is, okay, it seems like it's disconnected. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. There we go. So what is a sand dam? A sand dam is a small concrete rubble dam built across an impermeable riverbed in an arid or semi-arid region that experiences infrequent, high-intensity rainfall. Over time, the rain washes sand over land where it builds up behind the dam, creating a sand reservoir. That's this part back here behind the dam. Then, when it rains, the water infiltrates into the sand dam, where it is filtered, stored in the pore spaces in the sand, and protected from evaporation. The local community can then draw water from the sand dam via a hand pump or by digging scoop holes. This is what a highly productive sand dam looks like during the dry season. And this is what it looks like during the rainy season. You can see how much greener it was during the rainy season. So why are we interested in sand dams? Well, mostly because they are possibly the most cost-effective means to increase water security in rural drylands with sandy riverbeds. Sand dams naturally filter the water, store the water underground, reducing evaporation losses, help raise the local groundwater table, and aid in revegetating the surrounding land. While there is evidence for all of these additional benefits, it is important to note that sand dams do require a specific set of conditions to function well, and we do not yet fully understand what these conditions are. We'll dive into this a little bit more. I missed a slide. So I'm going to back up a second. So this is just an overview of where sand dams are found. A type of sand dams have been in use for thousands of years. However, intensive development of sand dams first started around 50 years ago in Kenya. Now they have spread to many regions of the world, shown by the countries colored in green here. This figure shows only the sand dams that had accessible information published online when it was created back in 2021. So there may be many more countries that have implemented sand dams that are just not available for sharing information online, or that the creators of this figure were not aware of at the time. So next we'll talk about design considerations for sand dams. So the first thing that we need to think about with this is to identify a suitable site. There are two primary resources that can be used to guide this process. One is a practical guide to sand dam implementation by the Rain Foundation, and Building Sand Dams, a practical guide by the founder of Sand Dams Worldwide, which is formerly Excellent Development, Simon Madrell, and his colleague Ian Neal. Between these two guiding documents, there are 44 siting criteria listed, but only 11 criteria are seen in both documents. And we'll go over that in a second. I have both links to both of these files. I'll share them in the chat near the end of the talk so that you can have those if you're interested in looking at them further. So of the 11 siting criteria that are common, we have bedrock on the land surface or near ground level, river sediment that is greater than 95% sand, but ideally greater than 99% sand, a river gradient between 0.5 and 5%, presence of only a few salty rocks, river sediment that is less than 4 meters deep, annual rainfall greater than 600 millimeters, but if the conditions are right, sand dams can be successful if there's in an area with rainfall greater than 200 millimeters. Presence of hard crystalline rocks, scoop holes present in the river, vegetation on the riverbank. The community needs to agree to have a sand dam to be built, and then also the materials for actually constructing the sand dam should be available on site or nearby. So, do these siting criteria work? Unfortunately, the evidence for this is not great. Ngugi et al. Conducted a study of 116 sand dams in Kenya and examined the relationship between siting factors and water availability. They found that only 4 siting factors consistently showed a relationship with increased water supply: rainfall amount, presence of water indicating vegetation, low percentage of clay in soil, and presence of rock outcrops. However, they did find that overarching factors like agroecological zones and stream order are correlated with sand dam performance, particularly zones with high potential for rain-fed agriculture, and sand dams built on streams with a stream order of at least 4 were more likely to have successful dams. So if you're unfamiliar with the concept of stream order, a stream order of 4 basically is a larger stream that has multiple tributaries, multiple upstream rivers feeding into it. So it's a larger stream, not kind of a small local stream, if that makes sense. This is a schematic of a sand dam. You want to build the sand dam in contact with the bedrock to prevent seepage from under the dam. The dam will have a central spillway over which most of the water will flow and may have a series of larger spillways to help convey water during floods. The dam has long wing walls built into the stream banks to ensure that the dam is well supported and to reduce erosion around the dam in the event of flooding. The dam also has an apron on the downstream end to help prevent erosion of the soil just downstream of the dam. Here we go. The size of the sand dam needs to be determined for each new sand dam construction. The spillway width, height, and length of the wing walls will all be determined based on the annual flood depth in the river and the river's average flow. The dam should be large enough to develop a sand reservoir upstream with acceptable storage potential, but not so large that it increases the potential for upstream flooding due to the raised streambed and reduced conveyance in the river. Specific details and equations can be found in the sand dam guidance documents shown previously. They're very location specific, so we're not going to go through all of that today. If you're interested in it, you can look at the documents I mentioned. So now we have reviewed sand dam siting design and guidelines for sand dams. It's good to understand why sand dams fail. As much as we would like every sand dam to work perfectly, this is not the case. Many fail, and these are the most common reasons. The selected site is not suitable. The river undercuts the dam due to inadequate apron design. Water seeps under the dam and undermines the foundation due to a poor seal between the dam and the bedrock. The river changes course due to poor positioning or an undersized spillway. And lastly, the dam fills with silt due to incorrect spillway construction, given the conditions in the river. Now, this last one is the most common reason for failure that I have seen. To avoid silted sand dams, it is recommended that sand dam spillways are constructed in 30 centimeter stages, that the sand reservoir rises to the spillway height before the next stage is built. This process is repeated until the desired spillway height is reached. Unfortunately, many do not follow this recommendation because it takes longer to construct the sand dam in this manner. Give me 1 second. My voice is a little hoarse. Thank you. Okay. So next we will talk about the environmental impacts of sand dams. This topic is derived from fieldwork that I did in Tanzania. I conducted regular surveys of macroinvertebrates, vegetation, erosion, and water table dynamics. I enlisted the help of community volunteers to take both groundwater and erosion measurements when I could not be on site. I will not discuss the water table because Ruth will go into detail in the next section on that. So this is an overview of where the sites were located. I conducted the field study at 3 sand dams in Tanzania, Kimokua near the Kenya border, and Soweto and Chididimo, both near the capital city of Dodoma. All 3 sand dams were constructed by the Mennonite Central Committee in 2011. And the Mennonite Central Committee specifically requested that the Kimokua sand dam be included in the study because it is not collecting and storing water. And they wanted to know if I could tell them why so that they could, avoid that problem in the future. So did I find macroinvertebrates living in the sand dams? No, I did not. I later concluded that sand dams are too homogeneous to support the various life stages of macroinvertebrates. Sand dams do not have much, if any, wood or large rocks to provide a habitat for macroinvertebrates. Sand dams also have very little organic matter, meaning they cannot provide macroinvertebrates with enough food to survive. This shows vegetative cover at each of the sand dams during the dry and the rainy seasons. VT1 is downstream of the sand dam, and VT2 and 4, 2 through 4, are upstream of the sand dams. The blue solid rectangles show the location of the stream. Kimokua, the non-functioning sand dam, has very little vegetation in both the dry season and the rainy season. And Soweto, which has the lowest land slope, has the greatest increase in vegetation between the dry season and the rainy season. Chididimo, which is highly vegetated during the dry season, has little room for improved vegetative cover, so it's heavily vegetated all year long. Overall, this hints that the average percent vegetative cover at the sand dam might be correlated with the land slope near the sand dam. Let's investigate that further. Here we can see how vegetative cover changes with elevation above the stream bed during the dry season and the rainy season. Generally, we can see the vegetative cover decreases as elevation above the stream bed increases. This is because vegetation on the gentle slopes has greater access to the available groundwater from a locally raised groundwater table compared to vegetation on steeper slopes. At the functioning sand dams, Chididimo and Soweto, we recorded sand being deposited on the stream banks and minimal erosion during the study. However, at the non-functioning Kimokua sand dam, we saw multiple instances of mass bank failure at the Kimokua sand dam. The sand dam may have exacerbated bank erosion at the downstream location by adding energy to the stream when it flowed over the dam. I've mentioned a few times that the Kimokua sand dam is not functioning properly. This picture is from one of the boreholes augured directly upstream of the sand dam. As you can see, the soil is mostly consolidated clay right here. This thick clay layer creates a barrier significantly slowing the infiltration of water into the sand dam and making it nearly impossible for community members to draw any water from the sand dam. So I just want to point out on this next page that just because the community members weren't necessarily able to draw water from the sand dam, it still added a lot of benefit for them because they were able to bring their livestock to the site and drink water from this pooled water behind the sand dam. But this also shows another issue that was present at the Kimokua sand dam site. When the stream was flowing, the water would flow directly into the left wing wall of the sand dam, creating strong swirling water that dug out the soil just behind the dam wall. The stream has migrated since the sand dam was built, and this migration is putting the stability of the sand dam in jeopardy. So next we will talk, Ruth will take over and she will go over how to sand dams interact with the surrounding aquifer.
Thank you, Jessica. If you just move the slide on, please. So now I'm going to discuss what happens to the water which is stored in the sand dam. Does the water level decrease dramatically as it leaks into the surrounding aquifer? Does it decrease slowly as it's used by the local community? Or can it actually increase as water comes from the surrounding aquifer, from the riverbanks, into the deposited sand? The answer, unfortunately, is quite complicated, and it really does depend on the things Jessica was talking about earlier. Depends on the dam's situation. As part of my research, published in Quinn et al., we examined 3 sand dams in southeastern Kenya, all quite close to one another. I'll be using the African sand dam names throughout the presentation, which are Dam 106, Dam 167, and Dam 211. So if you're ever in southeastern Kenya, you can look at these dams. So if Jessica, if you go back a slide. There we go. So we created water balances for each of the sand dams at various points throughout the sand dam itself. The water balance captured the water leaving through evaporation, the water leaving because it was used by the community, and also if leakage occurred, so if water was leaving the sand dam through leakage, or if water was coming in from the riverbanks. The figure shown here is the water balance at 2 locations at Dam 211, shown in cross-section towards the start of the dry season. So the dry season in Kenya starts towards the end of May, in this case, at the start of June. So the dry season in the year I looked at started in the middle of May. So it is clear here that the dam is leaking water, even if we look at 300 meters from the dam wall or very close to the dam wall. And this is shown by the black arrows indicating that water is moving from the dam out into the riverbanks and the surrounding area. Water is also being lost through evaporation. This value obviously is going to decrease with the falling water level. Water is transferred into the surrounding aquifer system for all reaches in this sand dam throughout all the study period we looked at. So we looked from May to August, and the sand dam's continually leaking water throughout the dry season, even becoming dry at the end of the sand dam. So towards the sand dam wall, it always had water, but as you moved away from the sand dam wall, the sand dam itself actually stored no water there. The water in this dam, the importance of water interaction in the area is important, as there was an agricultural well located approximately 10 meters from the dam. And we could really see what was happening if we looked at the water level in this well. The well was constructed several years before the sand dam and is frequently used for irrigation during the dry season. The water level at this well dropped below the base of the deposited sand within 4 weeks of the start of the monitoring period, indicating that the water in the surrounding aquifer system was lower than the water deposited in the sand dam, showing that the sand dam act as a leaky perched aquifer. Can you move to the next slide, Jessica? At Dam 106, a completely different water movement pattern is observed. Here we are only looking at one point in the dam, towards the dam wall, approximately 250 meters away from the dam wall. At the start of the dry season, as shown on the left-hand image, at the start of the dry season, the sand dam gained water from the riverbanks. But as the dry season progressed and the water table in the riverbank fell, the sand dam begins to transfer water to the riverbanks. So at the start of the dry season, it was getting water from the riverbanks. And as the dry season progressed, it started leaking water into the riverbanks. Also, again, worth noting that between the early and late periods, there's a substantial reduction in evaporation, because most evaporation occurs when the water level is close to the sand dam surface, and this decreases gradually as the water becomes deeper and deeper, as the water table falls. At another dam that I haven't shown here for brevity, the dam gained water from the riverbanks at one location throughout the dry season and lost water throughout the rest of the dam and even the dam wall. So it is clear for even the small sample of 3 dams that we studied in great detail, the water balances are highly variable. But what does this mean for the surrounding area? Next slide, please, Jessica. Obviously, if water is transferred from the riverbanks to the sand dam, the community can gain access to it through scoop holes and shallow wells. But what happens to the water transferred to the riverbanks? Well, studies like Ryan and Elsner from 2016 found that sand dams sites show consistently, statistically significantly higher mean vegetation index throughout their 7-year observation period. This indicates that the water lost by the sand dam helps support surrounding vegetation during the dry season. The presence of sand dams has resulted in a buffering effect of sand dams with a slower drying out of surrounding vegetation at the onset of droughts and faster, more sustained recovery after precipitation, occurring as water moves slowly from the dam to the riverbanks, as shown in my research. The next slide, please, Jessica. Finally, we'll talk about the multiple measures of success. As is clear from this presentation, sand dams can fulfill multiple different functions. They can be a form of rainwater harvesting, where a community can get access to the water from scoop holes and wells for themselves, their business, and their livestock and agriculture. It can also be a form of groundwater recharge, where water moves from the dams into the surrounding riverbanks, raising the local water table potentially and supporting the surrounding vegetation, promoting ecological restoration and recovery during the dry season and times of drought. So how do we assess whether a sand dam is successful, given its benefits are somewhat opposed? For example, if a dam's water is transferred into the riverbanks, it may be excellent at supporting local vegetation, but the community scoop hole may dry out sooner. Well, to gauge its success, it is best to start with the community. For example, the picture here shows a leaking sand dam. This was from Dam 167. Dams typically shouldn't leak. It's very bad civil engineering. But the water contained in the dam has been shown, because the water contained in the dam has shown to be of good quality. But if it's exposed, as in this leaky sand dam wall, the water quality will rapidly deteriorate. However, the community were delighted with this readily available source of water for their livestock farming and brick making, because they could easily pump it from this. It's essentially became a sump. There were also fish present, so maybe some microinvertebrates too. The pools created were just much easier to access the water than from the hand pump. Also, the local community had access to a government borehole that they used for their drinking water. So they weren't so reliant on the sand dam for drinking water, more for livestock and agricultural purposes. So we could approach it in a different way. For example, in their paper, Castelli et al. From 2022, I was an author on that. So we propose a consolidated research approach for understanding the complexity of sustainably related problems and solutions, which can be represented by a social ecological systems framework. This type of framework has been used to understand and address agriculture and water sustainable issues from the farm to global scale. So applying this type of framework to sand dams could provide a more comprehensive assessment of the impact of sand dams, considering both their ecological and the socio-economic indicators, which would reveal potential trade-offs or enhance positive things about the sand dam between these kind of socio-economic, water and ecological dimensions. So on to the final slide, Jessica. So in conclusion, there's a lot of guidance available to help increase the chances of building a sand dam that stores a large quantity of water, but we must acknowledge that there's still a lot to learn. There's many guidance documents available from the Rain Foundation and from sand dams worldwide, but research, as you can see from all these presentations, is very much in progress and moving forward all the time. Successful sand dams generally increase vegetation and access to water and do not experience much erosion. Sand dams have also proven to be an effective adaptation response to climate change in drylands by slowly transferring water from the sand into the surrounding vegetation. As sand dams are dependent on local dynamics and can have multiple uses, a clear aim and continual conversation with the community as to what they want is needed before construction, and a systems approach when measuring success may be needed. Thank you very much for listening, and that's the end of our talk.
Really, thank you very much, Ruth and Jessica. You've been perfect, like 30 minutes sharp. Yeah, really, thank you. We have already some question for you. Some question we had basically in the first presentation too, and just I want to point out one thing, because we have one very interesting comment showing like a video of like basically the 40s on 3 sand dams in Algeria, which were not mapped, I think, from the world map that you showed before. And but I think this stand with this kind of technology. I mean, again, sand dam research was focused on West Africa so far, but sand dams are a water harvesting structure. So, I mean, we cannot exclude that people also in the South Mediterranean areas, they did sand dams. And also we found evidence of sand dams in Angola. We know that people in South Korea are testing sand dams for water management. So that's really a very interesting solution. And you see that there is a momentum toward this technology because there is a momentum towards the use of alluvial aquifers. And I don't know if you want to comment on this, but I'm just moving up to the question that we have in the first talk. So maybe if you can comment all together. And during, I want just to come back to the question that we have in the first talk that were basically from Mezenbet Ibetal, that I'm not sure is connected still, but it was about how we can limit the fast water lost through infiltration at the sand dam. And I think that here the answer is quite obvious. You shouldn't build sand dams where you have infiltration, but you should go on bedrock. But of course, that's not always the case. So if you can answer on this and also comment of the global occurrence of sand dams.
Thanks, Giulio. You are correct that there are sand dams, evidence for sand dams around the world. And the figure that we showed was not comprehensive, as I mentioned. It was just the ones that we were aware of and we were able to find evidence of. But I think that there's evidence for sand dams in the Middle East. I know there's some in the southwest of the United States, usually related to cattle farming initiatives. And then, as you said, Angola and whatnot. In answer to your question about how to limit infiltration, the idea of a sand dam is that it will be built on an impermeable riverbed, but obviously the riverbed is usually buried under river sediment, so it's impossible to know whether or not the riverbed is actually impermeable, which is one of the reasons why the sand dam guidelines for siting include looking for river sections where scoop holes are dug by the community members, because they know where the local water is. So when you're just developing sand dams and siting sand dams, it's incredibly important to talk to community members about their local experience with water, because they will know from their experience where to find water better than we can, coming in from the outside and saying like, oh, this looks like a great sand dam site. But if there's water there, then it's highly likely that that river segment is impermeable, or if it does have some cracks, it's going to be very slow leakage, down into the lower groundwater level. That's why scoop holes is one of these siting criteria, and why it's so important to incorporate the community into your sand dam planning. I don't know if you have anything to add, Ruth.
No, you did an excellent job of answering that. And this is kind of just the information we're getting about sand dams we didn't even know about, is the importance of sharing and having events like this. I'd also just like to add, this is always the tricky thing about hydrogeology. You can't see what's happening underneath your feet. You don't have the access. As Jessica's saying, it'd be great to pick a site that has low infiltration, but we can't see because it's covered in sand. So also I would highlight, as long with talking to the community that Jessica recommended, but having a look to see what other wells are present in the area, so you can get an idea of whether the water table is very low or whether it's high, and how it changes throughout the dry season as well. Because if the water table is quite high, in line with the sand dam, then you're more likely to see transfer from the riverbanks to the sand dam, and it would be less likely to leak if the water table is obviously high, because the nature of water. But that's all I have to say.
Là, tout ce que j'ai à dire.
Yes, thanks a lot for your answer. I just to mention, so we are streaming live also on YouTube. I know that YouTube people cannot make questions, but I hope they are enjoying the masterclass, and also, our regards to them. So we had more questions. I will try to sum up them. I think they are very connected between them. So the first question was made in the first hour, and the other two are now. So the question were about, first of all, if the sand dams can create upstream, downstream problems. Then the second question is still technical, if which is the average age of a sand dam, so how long the structure lasts, and that's quite interesting, but I will leave the floor to the speakers. And there is a question in French, but I will translate it from Boubacar Al-Hassan. We have seen the best siting criteria, but which are the criteria for dimensioning the sand dams? So to recap, upstream, downstream potential issue, how long a sand dam can last, or which is the age of a sand dam, and then some criteria for the dimensioning of this structure. I'm sorry, I just remind you to speak a little bit slowly, because now the interpreters do not have any support. So I don't know if...
Okay. I can start, I guess. We didn't talk about who's going to answer first. So I guess I'll take the easy one first. I know it's out of order from what you said, Giulio, but what's the lifetime of sand dam? It's highly variable, of course. Even some, you build them and something happens, like the stream migrates, and it's not going to last very long. So if something happens to compromise the structural integrity of the dam, in terms of, it was improperly sized for its location, or, the stream is migrating or something, something can happen. But if you build it in a good location with good materials and good workmanship, it can last, 50, 100 years even, I'd say. These are small dams on smaller streams. And so they, can last quite a while. The wear and tear on them is less than if you were, building a large dam on a large river system. And then, oh man, I forgot already the first question. Do you remember?
The first one was about the upstream, downstream issues.
Yeah, so as far as the upstream, downstream issues go, sand dams store a very, very small percentage of the runoff that's in a river. And so I think it's like only 0.5% to 1%, maybe up to 2% at most if it's a small watershed in particular. So sand dams do not store enough water generally to create negative impacts downstream in terms of reducing water availability. And as you go downstream, the catchments get larger and larger and larger. So I think that it helps reduce this issue of actually causing issues downstream. One of the nice things I saw, sorry, I probably am talking fast for the translators. One of the nice things I saw when I was in Tanzania is you can also, instead of building a single sand dam at a point, you can build a series of cascading sand dams. So if you have, for example, 3 sand dams in a row, maybe 50 or 500 meters apart to 1,000 meters apart, that they have actually overlapping areas of influence, and they can help support each other in terms of growing that impact on the water table. So, for example, at Chidimo in Tanzania, there was 3 sand dams, and the middle of the 3 sand dams had water almost all year round, but that was not the case at the downstream and the upstream sand dams. So there can be very positive impacts from having sand dams built in series of kind of a cascading system. I don't know if you have anything you want to add in terms of upstream, downstream effects, Ruth.
No, so the sand dams 2 of the sand dams I looked at had dams upstream, and they didn't seem to cause any major issues as long as they're sited properly. That's the main thing. So if they're not sited properly, that would be the main factor that determines their success, rather than if there's another sand dam upstream. Just to talk about the lifespan of sand dams. So the majority of sand dams I looked at were 2 to 3 years old when I looked at them. They're still present now, so they're going on 8-9 years since I did the majority of my research there, and they're still performing well. The benefit of these smaller sand dams that I looked at in Kenya was that the local community were involved in the building of them. So they learned how to build the structure. So they also know how to maintain the structure as well. So there will be bits and pieces that need to be fixed, such as the ceiling of the dam wall sometimes goes and sometimes it leaks. But the expertise and the materials needed to fix it are present in the local community already. So I think that's a really important thing to mention when you're talking about longevity. They only need a little bit of support from locally based NGOs, and they can help sustain them. So that increases the longevity of these structures. About the sizing and the design, I think that was another question, how big to make them. There's a lot, I'm not an expert in that, but there's a lot of resources that Jessica shared in the chat, the handbooks and the manuals, and they go into a great amount of detail about how to properly design these systems. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in the design of them, to consult them. They're really, really good at explaining and detailing the kind of things you need to consider when you're designing the dam wall.
Yes, they have diagrams and all the relevant equations you can find there. They're very well detailed.
Thank you very much for these complete answers. And yes, I confirm what they say. So specifically for the building, you have to consider that the best siting of sand dams is part of their building. And that's usually the most critical element, because it's easy to build a sand dam. They are quite cheap technologies, but the point is where you make them. You will see the manuals. The only specific thing about the sand dams is the spillway. So the spillway is the part of the dam that allow the water to overtop the dam in a gentle way. Sometimes the spillway should be designed to allow the sedimentation only of sand, while the silt and the most fine sediment should go farther down, because if you have more sand in the sedimented area, then you can store more water. But again, I mean, I stress the answer that Ruth and Jessica did, so please check the materials again. And we have some other questions. So the first one, what is the major difference between a sand dam and an earth dam? And I think this quite important to clarify, but let's try to take a couple of questions together. We have a question from Annelieke. If you have done research in understanding the role of sand dams in the restoration of degraded sand dam rivers, then we have the question of the difference between sand dam and earth dam. So if you can deal with these two questions, and then we have a couple more, and then maybe we can close the session. Thank you.
So I have not done research on the use of sand dams to restore degraded rivers. As Ruth mentioned in her presentation near the end, that sand dams can be used to help revitalize the local ecology, because they increase the amount of stored water on site, and that water, seeps through the stream beds into the surrounding area, and it helps support increased vegetation in the area. So it greens it, and then that increased vegetation helps reduce erosion, and that also helps add water to the local for the local wildlife to even use. So they don't only help people, they don't only help livestock, they can also kind of help these natural elements of your environment in the ecosystem. So I don't have much to comment on beyond that. I don't know if Ruth has anything on
not specifically, but I did notice when I was there that at one of the dams, there was a big pit in it because there was some small scale sand mining. My only concern would be something that Jessica mentioned at the start, is that if you build these sand dams too quickly, then clay and silt and things that you don't want in the sand dam will build up behind the walls. So that might occur if people are extensively sand mining when the rainy season occurs and you get the deposition of the sediment. You might get a deposition of clay and silt rather than the sand it was before the mining. But I don't know anything about that. I just, that would be that would be something that I would consider. It might be potentially a bit problematic.
And then the other question was the difference between an earthen dam and a sand dam. So an earthen dam usually stores water just kind of on the surface of the water system. So it's open to the atmosphere, right? It's open to the sky. And then the water can evaporate, and it can also get contaminated more easily through livestock droppings or birds and whatnot, other animals. So that's the major difference, whereas the earthen dam usually creates kind of an open surface reservoir. And then the sand dam creates what we call like a sand reservoir. And then the water is actually stored in the void spaces, in the open spaces in those sand particles. So the sand itself is providing a couple services where it since the water is stored underground, less water is lost to evaporation. And then also because it's stored in the sand, that sand actually helps clean the water. It helps filter the water. So it's a little bit cleaner than it would be if it was stored in an open reservoir that you get with a sort of more traditional earthen dam.
Thank you very much. I added like one link on the chat that is a paper of 2016. It is actually not answering the question, so I've also no evidence of the purposed use of sand dams for river restoration, but there is evidence of a restoration of the riverside induced by sand dam. So if you need, maybe you can check this source. And we have other question, and then maybe we can close with this one. So I'm very sorry, but I mean it's almost one, and we have a really nice discussion, more than half an hour with this specific session, and we have two questions by Said Luz, which ask about sand dams and saying that they are only suitable in areas with favorable geology and hydrology. And I think the answer might be yes, but I will leave the speakers to reply. And then the second question by Said was about what happened when for sand dam you have like a period or successive years of drought.
I'll go first this time. So yeah, as Jessica said, the success of the sand dam is really determined by the site. There's very little you can do if you don't choose your site properly to remediate problems. You can also do things before you build a sand dam. Like I know that they work on terracing as well to prevent a lot of washing of clay into the sand dam when it's filling up with sand as well. So there's some things you can do, but it really does, just to concur, it does need a suitable area. In terms of successive years of drought, these systems are very dependent obviously on rainfall, because if there's no rainfall, there's nothing to fill the sand dam up. They are very good if the rainfall, not very good, but they do respond if the rainfall is maybe not as much as in previous years. They would be, because they're smaller scale systems, they would be a little bit more responsive and likely to fill up rather than larger reservoirs that you might rely on, which because as Jessica said, they only capture a small amount of the rainfall. So if there's less rainfall, they're still going to be more likely to be full than larger reservoir structures.
I just want to add one comment. So in Tanzania, there is kind of a split. In the north, they have rainfall 2 rainy seasons a year, and then 2 dry seasons. And then in the south, they have primarily one rainy season and 1 dry season. So they have, their dry season is much more prolonged. So in the south, at both Chididimo and Soweto sand dams, we saw the sand dam stored water for about 3 months into the dry season. But then after that, the community was no longer able to draw water from the sand dams. So sand dams are great for kind of filling the gaps in between rainy seasons, especially if you have those 2 rainy seasons and 2 dry seasons a year, like you have in Kenya and in northern Tanzania. But they will not store water indefinitely. You know, as Ruth said, that they leak through the, they often leak into the stream banks and sometimes down into, the lower aquifer through the stream bed. And so these are not, they're temporary water storage structures that provide kind of a bridge to get communities between rainy seasons. They, I would not expect a sand dam to store water, for years or a year with little rainfall, little to no rainfall, like as you get with a severe drought condition.
Thanks a lot. And we have basically, the data on failure on sand dams, we have it was answered by chat. And let's close with two questions. So the first one is the difference between a sand dam and an underground dam. And the second one, maybe you can further elaborate on the question of Pieter. So what about the failure of sand dams, and if there is some data, some lesson that we can learn from this? And then with these two, we close our masterclass. Thank you.
So from my understanding, an underground dam aims to create a barrier within an aquifer itself. We are basically creating an aquifer with the sand dam, but an underground dam, maybe I'm wrong, Jessica can correct me, hopefully, but an underground dam aims to disrupt the behavior of the aquifer by inserting a barrier within it. And that's my understanding anyway. In terms of failure rates, this is an ongoing area of research. Jessica actually highlighted it in her talk, that there were, I don't know how to pronounce, Nguai et al. 2020, so apologies, looked at the failure, looked at 116 sand dams throughout Kenya, and identified four key things to consider when you're siting a sand dam, which Jessica talked about in her talk. But just to summarize, I think they found that 33% of the dams actually held no water a week after the rainy season. And then the rest, and then approximately half of the dams they looked at held water throughout the rainy season, with the other percentage falling somewhere in between, going dry between them. But I think that's the key thing, that I think it was 23 or 33% didn't hold any water after a week. So they can be kind of deemed complete failure, whereas the other ones provide some sort of water throughout the season. So they're a bit more a bit better. But I put the link to that paper in the chat, so if anybody wants to have a look at it, it's far better explained there than I just gave it justice.
I concur with what Ruth said, and I just want to highlight one thing she said, which is that in terms of sand dam failure, that's one thing the community hasn't really decided yet, is what is a failed sand dam. And so I think we can all agree that a sand dam that doesn't provide water a week later is, probably a failed sand dam. But for beyond that, there's a spectrum of performance, right? So sometimes if a sand dam only provides water for a month, that's supporting the local community, that's supporting their need for a local domestic water source. It's better than nothing. Ideally, we'd love to have water for 6 months in the sand dam, but those cases are probably more rare. So it's a spectrum of performance, and we need to look at, or maybe think about more as a community, about what is the goal for building these sand dams. What is the duration of support that we're hoping to provide to the community, and can we increase the chances of meeting that benchmark?
Yeah, thanks really a lot, Jesse and Ruth. I just close with sending you the link of one paper that we did all together, so we have some information about sand dams and which are these topics, what is missing, how to define a successful sand dams, what is a failure, and so on. And also let me mention that as water harvesting lab, but with some colleagues, we are trying to develop a full database of available sand dams, also together with the excellent development. So fully, also we will try to track the existence of sand dams with a little bit of geolocalization. And thanks really all. And it was a really nice Q&A session, also this one. And we are very sharp with time. So I just leave the floor to Stefania for some final remarks and information about the Building Forward Better project. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulio. Thank you, everyone. Indeed, just to really thanks again, everyone from the excellent organization by the University of Florence, to all of the participants for their very active and proactive participation in the Q&A, and also, of course, to all of our speakers that really have provided an extensive and comprehensive illustration of the potential and remaining issues related to these water harvesting systems. From FAO perspective, I think the discussion has been particularly important because it really highlighted the connection with agricultural systems and how these can contribute to food security in contexts that are water scarce and where really water can be a limiting factor for food production. So I think particularly the participants of the Building Forward Better that I have seen they intervened as well in the discussion, I would like to thank them all as well. They have certainly appreciated the masterclass today because in Libya, Mali, and Niger, which are the target countries of the project, these topics are really of great importance for food security related topics. So with this, I would like just to thanks again everyone and remind everyone that all of the recordings of this session of the masterclass are going to be posted on the Building Forward Better website on the link that my colleague Ruben has just indicated in the chat. So I invite everyone to keep browsing through the website in the future weeks. We post all of the materials on those websites. So for the time being, you will find other materials related to water management and land restoration. And in the future weeks, also the recording of the session today. So together with my colleague Ruben and Maria Losacco, who have also supported the organization, thank you to everyone and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefania, and keep in touch with us for more of these activities. Thanks really a lot.